Hello, everyone. Here we are again. Chapter 12, The Essentials. And it's all about moral imagination and moral technique. And
All
a
right.
bit
Is that
more
it?
evolution.
Should we
Well done,
press the
Jonathan.
end of record button now?
and we're looking here at rich soil and expansive skies. And there's some unifying element between them and movement.
And yes, and we're trying to make sense of. Yeah, perhaps actually I can like take over there. So I talked about this in the group, but this is basically this idea that is depicted on the screen. These are like black and white diagrams in this book, where Prokofiev like maps the essential characteristics of cognitive development in the philosophy of freedom, which is what we've been talking about.
Can I just say before we do go on, because for me it's so glaring, it's very interesting. Prokofiev is Russian, but
Yes.
he has commented on the importance of Ukraine in various things. So as a Russian, he has that perspective too.
Prokofiev is dead.
Yes.
Aha, right.
Yes. It's just fantastic that this is also a Ukrainian flag. And so, there's focus on the world there. And then you've depicted how that is also a universal image in this marriage between heaven and the earth. That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
It looked like Jeff wanted to say something. No, he's shaking his head. No.
Go on.
Okay. So Prokofiev, who is dead, he showed how essentially the central message of cognitive development, soul exercise development in the philosophy of freedom and knowledge of the higher worlds, a book that we might be thinking about talking about at some later stage, how there is like a high degree of concordance between the two, and that's the book that I've got this image for. I don't actually know how well people are going to be able to read what's written there, because the text is fairly small.
Yeah.
You can't. I'm just going to put mine on. You can, yeah. Actually, I can, yeah. Good. So we don't need to read that. Okay, so moral imagination. Perhaps I'll kick off. Moral imagination takes center stage in this chapter. I think my takeaway, my understanding of the way he led us into this, I thought was quite interesting, because he was comparing motives for action, comparing positive, affirmative ones versus negative ones, and he makes the observation that positive ones tend to be it's like highly directive, and he gives it the example in the book of pay your taxes here, like clean your street on this and that day, and he talks about how that's like they don't have this like general applicability, in the sense that you have to be ultra specific when you're talking about a positive motive. And the opposite is true for the negative motives. And when you're talking about thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do this, so these motives that people take on board for fear of punishment, castigation, rejection, or whatever the reasons might be. And after he had outlined that, he then presents us with this problem. So how do we have open-ended positive motives. So the picture is, so we talked about the moral maxims. Was it last chapter or the chapter before? Okay, it's like do something that's good for society. I think it was a bit more wordy than that, but let's take that as a moral maxim. Strive to do good in society. Try to improve the lot of people in society, and or yourself as well. But there's nothing specific in that, and if we don't have images to work with, then so how should we do that? And this is where he introduces the idea that like moral imagination is this capacity for us to, working from a moral maxim like be good, it's like it leaves this open space where something can be inspired into us. It's like giving us a type of content to work with.
Okay. Angus, why do you start there, though, where you've already been given... So you're starting with moral imagination, but you could take the step back to moral intuition as well, which you've got at the top there.
So by usually there are multiple possible explanations for that. And we might look because I didn't even actually include those slides, but it's got to do with stages of consciousness. Generally, what I wanted to point out is the general flow of direction is like this.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it tends to be we gain pictures because actually the moral technique that you're talking about there, Jonathan.
No, I was talking about moral intuition, not technique.
This is the one that I probably struggled with. I had to think about a lot more before I came to a somewhat satisfactory solution, idea of what might be being said here. But before I share that,
okay.
What about yourselves? What did you think, Kate, Jeff, and Jonathan? What is this moral intuition that you think he's talking about here? Because I think imagination and technique is reasonably clear. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah.
Kate.
Moral intuition. I suppose that's sort of been gone over in the last two chapters. And to me, it's not only you can use moral imagination for an inherited moral maxim, but the moral intuition is actually the capacity to have new insights on what to do for every particular moment, if you take that seriously. So it's not really about necessarily making maxims your own through imagination, though you can do that. But I think moral intuition is having an idea of what to do in the moment, what is right to do. And because positive morality is so specific, the only way we can be moral creatures is to have the capacity to have a new insight each time and not inherit old ways of doing things, because then you're in danger of inheriting old imaginations as well. Is my sound good?
Yes,
yes,
great.
good. Yeah, excellent.
Okay, cool.
I'd like to pick up on that if you're
Yeah,
is this a good time?
Yeah.
I think that's true, and I think that moral intuition. I also think it's a stage, probably in the cognitive process. But I also think it's the selection process operationally. It's the way in which we choose which concepts that the field of concepts that we have as individualized pictures, the ones we select for the circumstance. So you've had to have had some life experience in order to have had a body of knowledge to select from for the appropriate. And so he talks about conceptual intuition and moral intuition, and in this case, moral intuition would be the applying the right concept to the natural order of things, something like that, right? Because
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing he does in this chapter. It's so
Yeah.
subtle. The way in which he takes us back into nature, back into the nature of things. In fact, the way in which we are, it's obvious the way we're separate from nature, and the way in which we've separated ourselves or have fallen out of nature, or because of the concept percept divide, and the fact that if we're not moral beings, as Kate was alluding to, then we're not human beings. But this is new. This is a fairly new event in human history. Like, I mean, I can talk about it abstractly as the Christ impulse that entered in all that nonsense. It's not nonsense. All that abstraction. But I can also say that this book wasn't written in the first century. It was written in the 19th century, or the 19th and 20th century, say. And this wasn't an available process until that time, it seems to me. Like, nobody could have been talking about the importance of the operational importance, existential operational importance, and phenomenological importance of the soul activities going on that he's describing when you choose a concept with your moral intuition to apply to the nature of existence. Because it's not moral if it's not applicable to the nature of existence. It has to be in harmony with the nature of existence.
Yeah.
And this is what the conceptual we all have this native ability, this conceptual moral intuition, I would say, but it also has to be developed, right?
Yeah, I guess that was the point, is that we were still working with Plato's and kind of, I think they, back in his time, they kind of felt this working from, the archetypes, but that's not just happening so automatically, shall we say, now. And Rudolf was actually able to kind of itemize the parts, as it were. I'll just quickly read from here. Moral action then presupposes, in addition, this chapter, in addition to the faculty of having moral ideas, brackets, moral intuition. So that's that. And moral imagination, that's the ability to transform the world of percepts without violating natural laws by which these are concerned. And that requires moral technique. So the way I see it is that the moral intuition, yes, it selects from out of the sum of our world of concepts. And as I understand that could be, if it's a living concept, it's not just, there's that goes with that. It will be applicable differently in every new situation, but still out of a living concept. Then the imagination kind of brings us that into a mental picture in our mind, so we combine it with our experiences for a mental picture. And then the moral technique is then we combine that with everything we know about the world, and our study of the world and the study of the concepts that are working within the percepts of the world. And so then that mental picture, that imagination, can then be fully worked into the world without disturbing it and making more problems.
Did you want to say something, Jeff? Otherwise, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that, because what we are describing can just almost sounds like a really complex computer, where that it's given input of the natural laws, and then it cycles through its experiences and then chooses the correct concept. But that's obviously not quite what it happens, because its moral intuitions are difficult and often don't occur. And I think the difference between an imagination and an intuition is that you have to be open to insight which has no like a concept before it's attached to a mental picture, the pure concept, and it's usually wordless and impossible to describe until you make it concrete with a mental picture. So it's more about this sort of spiritual innate not feeling, intuition for things that can't be, each person is individual in that, and nothing could be possibly programmed again, because it comes from the spiritual world as well as your world of experience. It needs both.
I think your word feeling there was the correct word, Kate. And because one of the things that Prokofiev does in the books, he maps it to inspiration, which is the spiritual counter build to the feeling life. And if I try to describe in more perhaps accessible words what I think is going on there is when we've got a moral maxim, it's like we cultivate that, or that's part of our I. If that lives in us here. That lives in us here, and as it lives in us in its own invisible way, without metal images connected to it directly, we try to get rid of that and just live in the essence of that moral maxim. My understanding is that generally, obviously not always, but generally, so we might get some type of mini vision, some image of some capture all image, which encompasses a new way forward, a new way of fulfilling that motive that we've got there, but it's not worked out in detail. It's perhaps a grand vision that has got little connection to how it's actually then going to be worked back into reality. That might be something like, the question that one of the reasons that we're here is because for a long time I felt that I wanted to be doing something actively with people who were interested in anthroposophical philosophical questions, and so that lived in me in a very unconcrete way. There was a desire, a wish, living there, had no idea how it might realize itself. Picture starts coming through as to how that might be, and a lot of that is based on what's happening around me. But and as my feeling life gets involved, more details start coming around how that might actually work out in reality. And then if something ever gets done with that, that's where the moral technique comes into. It's how you might actually bring it back down onto the physical plane. But the reason why, coming back to why I think your word feeling is actually the perfect word there, is because the moral imagination is connected with the organ of thinking, and the moral technique is the organ of willing, and the feeling life is the bridge between these two. And we don't experience these as separate. They tend to flow into one in our soul lives. But that's why I like your description.
It doesn't make sense to me though, because I feel that intuition, from what I've read from this book, is more deeply married to thinking, and imagination is more deeply imagined to feeling, because feeling is personal and feeling is connected to my mental images of things. Feeling is my my personal subjective experience in connection with what I think about things. And so mental pictures and imagination is very close to feeling in how I've ordered these concepts. And intuition comes first, and it's the thing that flows directly into thinking. So that's what I don't really understand.
Okay. Here comes mental picture.
Okay.
After this whole time, I even thought I was wrong at one point. So the mental picture is absolutely key here. It has to be. It has to. He says it. The free spirit has a concrete mental picture, because the moral impulses have to be brought into something concrete. You said it, Kate. You said it, and the concrete thing is what is the word he mentions. And you could also, the mental picture is where everything goes wrong as well, because that's where people are duped. They think their mental picture is reality, and they've been given the concepts that form the mental picture. They haven't derived their own. They haven't derived their own mental picture through thinking. But thinking is, I mean, the mental picture is associated with feeling, but it's also associated with thinking, in that it's individualized concepts. But the only way you can individualize a concept is if you have a feel for it, because it's yours. It's your worldview. It's your Weltanschauung. It's your way of viewing the world, and there's no wonder that people are desperately holding on to their own adolescent world picture about the way things work when they didn't come up with it themselves, right? But when you come up with it yourself, then it can start to move as an image, and then it becomes moral imagination, right? And imagination is spiritualized thinking, or it's, what do you say, individualized, the individual experiencing thinking in a spiritualized way, something like that, the soul experience. Because in other places he refers to imagination as a somewhat passive experience to some degree, because you in the initiation process you have to quiet the imagination in order for inspiration to enter. But with Angus, it's clear from his other work that what he is describing as the transformed feeling life as a cognitive perceptual ability is inspiration. It's pure information without the imagery, just pure music, the music of the spheres speaking, just purely informational. And you touched upon that with it's before words or it's after words or that sort of thing. But then we have to sort of make a mental picture of it if we're going to operate in the world in a morally effective way with moral technique and our action. So I would just add that at this point, we're really getting right to the core of this mother.
I like this chapter.
And it's very good. Obviously, we're not trying to do it here, but there is a tendency in me and I think in all of us to kind of try to schematize it, because in the sense that the moral intuition requires the will in thinking. And, as Jeff was pointing, you're only going to sort of be selecting through the feeling that is in that as well. So in each of these points, we could speak about all three of those things, I imagine.
Yes, and intuition. That's something that's occurred to me this go around with his work is that when thinking about initiation, meaning imagination with a capital I, inspiration with a capital I, and intuition with a capital I, or as a lovely teacher named Douglas Gerwin refers to them as imagination, which is apparently has a distinct meaning. Has roots with a distinct meaning, and inspiration and intuition, and that this somehow separates them. But it doesn't really matter if that's workable for you, Angus, apparently. But the point is that intuition is in all of those, or intuition is in imagination, and intuition is in everyday thinking, it's in imagination, and it's in inspiration. And in fact, I would suggest incorporates inspiration and imagination into itself when you've reached this place where you've spiritualized your sentient soul relationship with your physical body, something like that. This might be
just supporting supporting further what you're saying there, is the same is with our relationship in the physical world. We don't go around sort of like thinking, we don't tend to exclusively it's like recognize that's a percept, that's a nothing without a mental picture, that's a nothing without a concept. We don't separate the world like that in this sphere, and it, because we are even less conscious in this other sphere, it's even more of a challenge to pick it apart. For me, part of what's going on with the feeling, there's these sort of like these troublesome phrases that come out. Wait, we get introduced to it here, don't we? The world is thinking in me. He doesn't really talk about the world feeling in me and the world willing within me, but certainly in the first 7 of the chapters of the Philosophy of Freedom, that's what it's all about. It's like when I'm conceptually aware of the world, it's like it's suppressing my bodily activity, and I'm in this universal activity of thinking. And when I think about what he's talking about here in terms of moral intuition, one of my ways of beginning to try to get a handle on it is, here I am living in the world of the feeling world. Sorry, the feeling world is living in me, and it shares its wisdom and insight through in that means, and it expresses itself. It expresses itself, as you were saying, Jeff, in Music of the Spheres, in speech, in something that goes just beyond. It might be a living image. It might be the living image of Goethe's archetypal plant, but that plant isn't capable of communicating something out of its inner being to us. This is what's added by the dimension of inspiration or moral intuition. The being speaks out of itself about, this is my essence. You don't need to sort of like guess or try to deduce it or anything like that. I am this. Yeah. So
to flavor that a little bit in relationship to Zach and Ian's conversation, Stein and McGilchrist, when they were talking about the evolution of the larynx before the language centers, and that there was a time in which we were just musical. We were an articulation of the music of the spheres, of pure information through being musical instruments. And in fact, oddly enough, my daughter's crawling through here behind me, and in her my struggle to make sure that the right kind of music stays in our school, I had this conversation occurred where it had sort of instrumentalized, no pun intended, music and its utility, so to speak, which is just a crass way to think about music, at even in mundane terms. But I did some research, the spiritual nature of tone, and in that he describes music coming out of out of Devachan, which is the realm just above Kamaloka, where you're experiencing absolutely pure joy and reconstructing your life for the next life to come. You're just going through this absolute state of bliss because it's like you've gone through and digested all the experience of the lives that have been before, and particularly the previous life, and now you're taking all of that and creating a new composition that is you, right? And then on the other hand, he talks about the fact that we were musical instruments at one time, and that we had to create musical instruments because we lost ourselves as a throughway for the creative impulses that are going on, that are present with us. And so instruments in themselves became a sort of instrumentalist. You know what I mean?
That's so good for what we'd lost.
Yeah, right. And the violin is a perfect picture of that. And it's really important. It's, you know, that sort of thing. Uh, um, One isn't saying it's not important. In other words, uh, so again, maybe too far afield, but but I wanted to touch upon what Kate was saying, which is that this is before language, and in a
Yeah.
sense, it's after language, and music is part of the spheres, and that we are an expression of we are in some sense a musical expression, um, and so is our organ system, say for speech. So speech comes after. Um, in inspiration, we're like going back to where speech itself came from.
That musicality of language, I just want to say, I was actually reading something this morning by a guy called Adkiati, and he was reflecting on the fact that it's not by chance that, for example, Hebrew and languages prior to that, they often didn't even bother with the vowels. Hebrew doesn't have any vowels. You have to guess it. Or you have to know it from the context. And he reflects on this idea that this was because language was experienced it was experienced musically. It wasn't experienced conceptually like we do now, which is, I think, it's the same thing as you're saying here, Jeff, isn't it?
It's also what our friend Jonathan almost always argues for when he's overwhelmed by the etymology police. You know, he's kind of saying there's got to be something in the music of the language that speaks to the way in which language was an action, but rather than a description. It was a continuity with reality rather than a propositional. Um, um, what do you say? A propositional, provisional way of holding the world as over here, like could be like this kind of thing. And then, of course, we've become so. Speaking of instrumentalists, we've become so enamored with the provisional that we think it's real.
Well, the breaking down to a conceptual level. I think what's going on in poetry, the alliteration and the rhyming and the different meters that you have there, which was also sort of like a real strong part of Greek culture, and prior to that, it's like rhyme and meter were an essential part of communicating. But there's this part in the Bible where Christ says, like, the Spirit isn't given by measure, and so one interpretation that I've read on that is this is also a recognition that music is no longer a way of conscious communication of ideas. We have to be working at a conscious level rather than at a feeling level. I'm not saying this is true forever and a day, but so like at this with the development of the consciousness soul, that communicating, let's call them spiritual truths through music, is not congruent with the state, the phase that we're in now, which is a conscious process of this. And
Can I go on a tangent?
go for it.
I was thinking another thing that music has is it kind of takes you out of time, and the way we have analytical language now really places us in time, and all of grammar is about how we communicate time and what we're expressing. And so I would argue that it's not even that we are more conscious, but that we are more analytical. And that because I truly believe that we came, if you think about the music of the spheres and the angelic choirs, and that they are singing the world into existence, and we will sing again with them when we have learned what we are learning now, and that we're at this moment in the consciousness soul where we have slowed music down so much that it's not musical anymore, so that we can be analytical about it. And that's what our speech is now. And I agree that you can have a feeling for etymology, but there are other things as well where I learn what a word actually means and where it actually comes from. And it's often completely opposite of what I think, because of the way that I have these associations based on the way a sound is used in culture today, which it never might not have been before. And a word like that is passion. To me, the word passion means what it means to modern people, and it sounds like it means that. But if you really think about where it comes from, it puts another context on where we've come from and how we're developing. And yeah, so this gift of language in this really technical way, it's also a gift of slowing down of the music to really
as we gradually
Yeah.
wake up to our own
Yeah.
spiritual individuality.
I had this dream the other day where I was notating music as if I was writing, like writing in a diary or something, and it was easy. Like I was forming the notes as though they were words, and I was in the dream really confused where was this skill coming from, and it was an honest dream. But learning about analytically how this works, so that you actually are more free in the end to make more beautiful music. Learning and learning and learning how to do it, and then kind of forgetting all you're learning, but it still exists somehow. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how we will reintegrate back into
Yeah.
the choirs.
It does. I was thinking, as Angus was talking about, the next phase beyond consciousness soul, which is spirit self, and the phase of spirit self will be after the analysis has sort of, you could say, after the post analysis, you could say, right? Because what is analysis means to break things down, right? It's the analytic. It's the literal tearing apart, gnashing of teeth on over things, so that and he does it again in this chapter, and much more calmly, I would say, and then he repeats it twice in the addendum. We repress the organic organism, and this one really has teeth this time because he puts us in the world with as moral beings. He puts us right back in the world. And he does so both through moral technique and moral action. But I want to come back to moral action. So he makes this statement that we repress the organic activity and replace it through intuition at first. Intuition's like the hand that slows it all to stillness, and then thinking arises and replaces the organic process. And this is a moral action, right, in itself, because it's changing the perceptual framework of what it is to be a psychophysiological being, right? And this is the thing I meant when I made the comment yesterday, is that we are changing the world. I mean, all beings have a relationship with the world where they're having some sort of reciprocitous relationship. We are changing the world in ways that are permanently different than the thing that it was. We're pulling the world out of a cycle, and we're doing it without lawfulness. We're so largely, right? I mean, this is why we have the social difficulties, but even more so the way in which we've objectified the world abstractly, and are and just treat it as if it were our infinite resource when it's a finite resource in some respects. But these actions speak to the way we alter the world, and once a moral action occurs, it's always there. It's permanently there.
It's a fact then.
Wow, are we part of evolution, right? And now we have to be. Now we actually have to choose this process. Otherwise, it's our own demise.
Yeah, because I would agree with you that every action is a moral action, but because even our thinking is a moral activity, because that stops and replaces the organic, natural world. However, is it moral because it's us doing it, or what morality is doing that? Do you see what I'm saying? For us, it's not truly moral until we are fully doing that. But it's happening all the time. And so, I'm trying to say there's other being doing it.
In bondage to other ideas, is that what you're referring to?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, including each other, including the authoritarian state of public opinion, say, including, and I guess you could say that's in service of other beings. But I'm not sure it's particularly helpful in this chapter to be talking about other beings yet. Like,
no, but I just wanted to say, you said that even thinking is moral action.
Yeah.
But it's quite with this text we're being very careful to distinguish. Moral action is only when we're fully present in all.
I don't think so.
That's our.
I don't think so.
So it's not something that happens automatically. So if I'm just dreaming about what I'm going to have for lunch, that's not my moral. That's not me being a moral actor. Although it is, thinking replacing organic activity.
It depends on where your food came from, to a certain extent. I mean, every act is a moral act. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
There's just no way around it. We either are fucking things up or we're making them better, and we don't know. I mean, at this point, we're new at it. But I want to touch on this moral action because it's not just moral; it's immoral too. So a moral action it can be an immoral action. It's not necessarily morally positive. There's no innocuous action as relates to morality, and the absolute idiocy of the time we live in that has done away with morality as part of the subjective self is it's just tragic. And here it is. There's just no way around this operational procedure. We are moral beings, or we're not human beings.
But am I moral if I'm just following orders? If I'm just doing what everyone else does?
Yes, you're compliant to an immoral crime against nature, say, or a crime against the laws of nature, the natural laws of nature.
Yeah, but
because
I'm not instigating a free action, and that's the only real.
No, but you're participating in devolution. You're participating in a decline. I just don't see any way around this. I just either we don't. It's the Buddhists have this intimation of without the epistemology, say that every step is an effect in the world, and that was a real foreshadowing of the kind of reality of the way in which we affect the world. I may not be addressing exactly what you're saying, but I'm obviously pretty adamant about what I'm saying.
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying because my sort of credo is that everything is spiritual reality at bottom, and spirituality is meaningful and moral activity. But the point I'm trying to make is, and I think it's important in the context of this book, is that we are not moral actors until it is our own moral intuition.
I think you two are using moral in slightly different ways.
Yes, exactly. I'm being very strict, and Jeff's being kind of broad, and I'm trying to say, and it's very important the side you're putting as well, because it has great importance in how we run society. But I would strictly say that if I'm not able to be moral, I'm unfree, and if I'm unfree, I'm not moral. I'm just pushed around. I'm not really responsible for my actions. I should be, and I could be, and I could try to be. But do you know what I mean? I'm just doing what someone else has said I should do, or what a biological impulse is prompting me to do. And I don't call that morality. It's some other being's morality. It's not. I'm not being moral.
Yeah, you're speaking of morality in the positive sense. Like I'm not being right. Yeah.
Exactly. And reading the German, you don't get this problem that we have in English, that morality can be a judgment, or it can just refer to an action. And so he uses the word sittliche and Ethik. And so in English, it's very easy to misunderstand each other on exactly this point.
Okay.
That you two are both being, what I would say, so like factually correct, but you're actually talking about, you have different ideas on what morality, and that's why you seem to be not agreeing.
Right, so there's two different words in the German, in the original.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Dieter Brühl, in that Spiritual Encounters book, and it's been brought up in our book group, speaks of morality, amorality, and immorality. And he associates it with what it is to be social, asocial, and antisocial. Right. So the economy is an antisocial act because it's naturally it's taking something, a resource, out of the social ecology, say, and that is that could be a moral act or it could be an immoral act, right? It depends on how it's done, but it is out without regard to the transformation of resources, not the economy as a whole. Like, unfortunately, we treat it that way, but.
Yeah, but this is difficult because with this text we're trying to be very scientific about it, and so to not to put the moral, judgment to one side for a moment and just to see what is, and so then that other moral sense is what we're looking for, rather than the moral judgment sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because those moralities you mentioned, there's also, I would put then other morality as well beside that, because moral, amoral, or immoral is all a judgment from one perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's assuming every human being is the same as every other human being.
Yeah, I see where you're going. I totally agree with that. And I would say that he does this other amazing thing in this chapter, which is to associate the moral operational process with natural science, right? With the natural world and natural science. And why would we say that it wouldn't be like right? That's the whole book is sort of designed to have this moment where ethics is can only be described through this process of the way in which we act in the world, and then the world is affected by us, right? And so that's ethics. So I guess what I'm talking about is a broader terminology that uses ethics as the sort of encompassing configuration. And there's versions of morality that are good and bad.
All action, everything we do has a consequence.
Yeah,
that's your perspective, whereas Jonathan's is, can we talk about it in terms of good and bad? When is it good and bad? And what's the relationship of free will to moral actions?
Well, and that it's scientifically untenable in this spiritual science sense that he's really establishing here to act immorally, and that's what Jonathan's saying. I think that brings these two perspectives together.
I don't quite understand what you mean there.
No, I didn't actually understand what you said there, Jeff. Run that by us again. The immoral bit.
It's scientifically untenable to act immorally.
Yes, right, because it's an act against the order of things. And this is established, right? Because in your moral action, you have either achieved a process that is in harmony with the order of things, or you haven't. And so if you haven't, then you've violated the natural order of things. And so this is why he says this is a question of natural science, not of ethics. And any ethics has to be based in the natural science of the moral imagination, right? The moral imagination is part of who we are as human organisms.
But I understood that in the sense that ethics cannot pronounce what we should do. It can only be a history of moral activity.
That's not the way I read it. That's not the way I'm reading it. That definitely is not the way I'm reading it. I would say that last part, the natural history bit, is a way to sort of document the way in which moral ideas have evolved. Not just moral ideas, but morality itself has evolved, because it's evolved in relationship to the way we've affected the world. And it's pretty easy to see at this point in history, we have a very clear example of the way in which we are degrading the world through immoral activity. And we've adopted an amoral and even immoral stance as relates to our worldview, the post-Kantian worldview.
But how can you go? This is interesting because we get to this evolution point, which is, so we've got this history of moral ideas, and we can bring it right up to, just a minute ago. But how can we from there then develop a new species from all that we know of that?
By emptying ourselves, contemplating our moral maxims, and seeing where they lead us. So we see the challenges in the world, and then we let the spiritual world fructify us, and then we gradually transform that into action.
Yes, but if you have action. Let's bring the example in the book. Could choose better ones perhaps, but say you have, and I'm going to bring them closer together. So say you've got a fish. Can you develop a crocodile out of a fish? And so that's that point of, can you, from all the moral actions that have occurred up to now, develop maxims that develop an ethics that is going to point to what you then should be?
When you make a piece of music, do you know how the music is going to end, or how the music is going to be at minute 4 from how the music was at minute 1?
You might not even know how. You might know the whole score, but I don't think you will know exactly how you're going to press each key. That
was the point you were making yesterday, wasn't it, Kate? You've got to make a smudge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it comes out of that beyond time perspective where it's a creation happening, and even if you listen to the whole piece of music, but there was a minute left that you hadn't heard yet, hadn't existed yet, you wouldn't know how it was going to go. You can know a lot about musical theory, and you can have a lot of experience in music and kind of make judgments on how that can go, but it's still.
I'm going to contrast the music of Kate's voice and the idea that she's talking about there, and it's linked to this horrible word, or these two horrible words that I was talking about yesterday: irreducible computation. It's exactly the same idea. You've got to go through all the steps. You can't jump over steps to get somewhere. And I see it as being a description of exactly the same. Music and irreducible computation, in that sense, they are identical. You can't.
How can you compute what hasn't been?
I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to this video by Wolfram. The guy, it was a ChatGPT related thing, and he was talking about it, and I got nerdy about it. He'll explain a lot better, and it'll take him an hour to do it, by the way.
If the music exactly repeats a previous phrase as its last phrase, then you might be able to say, "Oh, I knew that was going to happen."
That's right. There's no life in that, then, is there? Exactly. It's a dead seed.
Exactly.
It's not alive.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan. I think that you're saying. I think you're asking a super funky, abstract question that is not applicable to any kind of reality at all. Now, I might be wrong about this, so I'm taking a chance.
Oh my god! Because for me, this is the whole heart.
How do I turn a fish into an alligator? Well, I mean, we could probably do it. Actually, it's technologically, we probably have the ability to genetically engineer that. But it would never be
You
an
can do it
alligator.
now because you've got the alligator and you've got the fish, and you understand how the concepts between them.
Okay.
But if you just had the fish and you don't have a concept of an alligator, you don't have a person
so what we have I can get a novel version of that which exists already.
Because maybe is that what you're saying with the computational thingamajobby, that you could run through all the possible permutations, and within that infinite, mark that word, infinite possible series of permutations, there's a crocodile in there. But how do you possibly get an infinite possibility section of possibilities to choose from one of them? That's going to take infinity to do and to choose from.
Well, why would you presume there's infinite possibilities?
Let's imagine you want to walk to your baker's, Jonathan. Let's imagine you want to walk to your baker's, and there are certain steps you're not allowed to take. You're not going to get there, are you? That's what irreducible computation is.
The baker's exists.
Yeah, and so in your moral maxims, it's like the concepts that live within there, the moral intuition that's at the heart of that. That is that you individualize this this being and try to sort of move with it, to incarnate it into the world. It's the bringing into existence one form of a whole, in the same way that drawing a triangle is one manifestation of the concept of triangle. It's not all triangles, it's a manifestation built on on a basic concept.
But you can't draw a triangle. We can only conceive of triangles. There's no triangle. So that's a bit of an awkward one. But if we go from a fish to a crocodile, okay, I'll give it to you. Okay, let's say it's not that. I think there is, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's not an infinite possible variation from a fish. Maybe there's an end there, there's an end there. But try and imagine how big that number is, and then see if you can select crocodile out of that.
But it's not a quantitative question. So it has to do, as Kate was saying, it has to do with I don't want to put Kate's words in Kate's mouth. What it has to do with is creating the novel out of that which is existent up to this point, not out of that which might be existent at this point, but actually what is existent at this point, creating something new. We just have no choice. We do that all the time. We're doing it whether we want to or not. We're changing the world as we walk through it, and that is a newness. And we're gods, and we're sometimes gods of destruction. And our society as our whole technological computational stack, you could say, is a behemoth. Is a absolute. It's like a god of destruction. So I don't. Jonathan went away, but I think this is that what we can do is then have an ideal for what would be best out of the circumstances that we have, and let the ideal draw us forward, and then we ourselves are metamorphosing these operational capacities to have moral imagination, to test it out. Somebody brought up early in our group that you can't get around at this stage in human development. You can't get around predictability as a tool, as a measuring tool. And I think that's the same as also that starting with that brush stroke. And again, we're new at this. So anybody who claims to be an expert would be, they would be like the critic who can't actually produce anything.
I'm beginning to wonder if I'm beginning to get it closer to, it's like a central concern of Jonathan here, but I'm not sure. I'll have to test this on him. And I think I've mentioned this in other videos before. I know I've said it lots of times. Whenever I'm confused about Steiner, it's usually got to do with love or freedom. That's my sort of like, and I think it might be the freedom aspect that's coming in here, because how can we be free if there's a predetermined path? We can't be. And this is one of these things that is so difficult. Jonathan wants to get from the fish to the reptile, and that's already a determined path. But what does that have to do with our own more?
What do you mean it's already a determined path? You mean it's happened?
Yeah, in that sense. But we're supposed to be moving. If we're supposed to be moving towards, it's like morally evolving into free beings, that already stinks of compulsion. It's got to come from the inside. So
Yeah.
there can't be sort of like guaranteed pathways of getting from one place to the other. In that sense, it is an open book. Nevertheless, I do think that when we see we're moving towards moral freedom, is we are trying to manifest the whole logos through ourselves. It's like this this universal like activity of thinking which encompasses everything, and a feeling and of willing which encompasses everything. When we identify completely with that, we become free beings, but that doesn't determine us. We still have a center out of which we can choose what it is that we want to do. I don't know if that's what was sort of like behind your fish.
Imagine something like on the one side there's the natural world, on the other side there's a spiritual world, thinking that's involved with perception on this side, and we can look to both of those. So where are we? Where do we belong? Is there a third world? Do you know what I mean? Or is there, is there a free space that's neither determined by neither of those?
We are. Paradise is at your own center. Unless you find it there is no way to enter. We'll come back to Angelius Silesius in a little bit, but there are some. And there's another one that I read of him. God is the fire, and I am God's light. It's another one by the same guy, and it's this idea. It's like there is no separation. As when mystics talk about like this mystical marriage, God and I are one. Or in the language of philosophy of freedom, the universal activity of thinking and I, because thinking is conscious, are one.
But is God a spiritual being, or did God
ask him? Give him a call.
Ask Kate. She's politely raising her hand in this firestorm of bluster.
Pull us out of the mud, Kate.
I don't know how to start now.
We'll be quite.
Okay, so I was watching an interview with Daniel Hafner yesterday, and he was talking about the threefold social organism, and he was saying that what people have to realize about the threefold social organism is that it already occurs, and that's what we have to. There's a difference between carrying out the will of heaven, like the will of God on earth as it is in heaven, and setting up this future utopia that will be perfect and where no one will ever suffer. We have to realize that because every action is moral and has consequences, there is always going to be there's always going to be towards what we want and away from what we want and everything we do. But the good thing is that we are already capable of the threefold social organism. We are already thinking, we are already having moral intuitions, and we just have to become aware of that and become conscious of how we can do that. And every time we act towards, whether it's threefold social state or whether it's God's will on earth as it is in heaven, which basically just means this is how reality works. The threefoldness is already in reality, and we can act in accordance with it or not. And so that is how it's still free, because it exists, and you can act upon it, and you can choose to make it new because it already exists, not because it's predicted into the future and we must act this way and we are morally impelled to do so, but because goodness already exists and we already act good to one another, and we already respect one another, and we already believe in brotherhood and freedom, and we already have moments where we are free. We're not free all the time, and our deeds are not always free, but our deeds always have consequences, so we might as well try and be as free as we can every time, because that is how we push forward this a good future, by knowing that we are already doing so. We just have to do it more, and we just have to do it new. That's how I see it.
There's no freedom without constraints, and
Yeah.
freedom is also it's freedom to do something, not to the freedom from something. And it doesn't do any good to sort of say, well, I'm not free because I can't fly at will. Like, well, of course you can't, because that's not what human beings do. You're a human being, so you actually have to be serious about being free. You can't make childish statements about flying. Although maybe I still believe it's possible.
I'd like to reword what I perceive as being what Kate was saying, the sentiment of Kate, right from the beginning of this book. This book is promising to develop that region of soul within you where freedom is possible. And I think this is what's being delivered in this chapter. Like you've been referring to, Jeff, the magic of realizing how in our moral lives, we're the same. We evolve. We have a degree of freedom, but there is this evolution into life that comes out of the spiritual life, and it's similar. Conceptually, it's identical, apart from the freedom aspect, with everything that we see in nature around us. We are not outside of nature. We live within nature, and the process of nature that he tells us live in us, they also apply to the moral life and the development and the evolution of the planet, of mankind. And that was one of the fruits of listening to what you were saying there, Kate. Thanks.
You're free because you have the ability to be good to other people and to the world. Like, you're given the tools to do that, and that's amazing, because then you can create a better world. And
go on, sorry.
I don't know. You're not free to escape the world. You're free in the world.
You're free to love your actions.
Yeah.
And if what I disagree with Ian McGilchrist is that value is the ground of being. I think love is the ground of being.
Yeah.
And you're free to love. It's not easy, but you have to be free to do it, which is the trick. And if you love your actions, they will be moral. They will be consistent with the ground of being, the order of things.
And for me, because it's the way it's presented in this chapter, the clarity of the thinking around this process allows it to live more strongly in me. It's this a little bit this idea of moving from belief to knowledge. We might have these vague feelings of how these vague is the key word here, intuitions about how our actions are connected to our moral life and to motives and characterological disposition. But what's being mapped out in this chapter is a level of clarity in our own thinking life, in our conscious life, which is, for want of a better word, it's empowering. I am understanding myself better thanks to what's being presented in this chapter, and anybody else who gets to varying levels of understanding in this chapter, they are enhancing their understanding of themselves.
Yeah. For the first time since Kant and Hume, the ought is where it ought to be. Right? So we're always trying to derive in the Kantian and neo-Kantian worldview, we're always trying to derive the ought from the it. And here he actually establishes that the ought and it are not separate, right? So the what you ought to do, or what we ought to do with our technologies, is we ought to develop technologies that enhance the laws of the world around us, because they're harmonious with the laws of the world around us, and the law of what it is to be a human being, which is extraterrestrial in a certain sense.
And perhaps that's what we are doing, but because we're sort of not doing it quite so freely and lovingly, we're sort of saying, oh, but I'm going to make sure it does this other thing as well, like, I don't know, gives me vast profit or something like that. And then it that ought gets that we would freely and lovingly just be doing naturally, makes a misstep.
It's interesting
Anything
how those sorts of actions are not, you can't really love them. Like, you never love something that you're addicted to. It's like this compulsion that you have this hateful relationship with. And
Yeah,
if you have, these ulterior
it's a
motives,
fascination at best.
yes, a fascination at best. But I mean, at least in my life, anything that I've become, you could describe it as an addiction, has always been this horrible relationship with it. I didn't love it at all. I hated that action, and actions out of greed and lust and pride. It's almost like you're blind to the action itself. Like you kind of want to fulfill this pre-state before, the greed especially. I just always want to maintain this sort of wasted potential at all times, and never love anything. I just want to have as much as I possibly can, so that one day I could love something. And it's so, yeah, it's unnatural, and it's against how people actually work. And that's what I like about this book, and Steiner in general, is because he really shows me you're doing it already. You just have to find where you're doing it already and believe that you are doing it already. And that's what it is. That's how I stop worrying about what's going on in the spiritual worlds. And that's how I also understand how Steiner goes on to develop these amazing techniques, like his education and his biodynamics and his curative eurythmy, and his, those are moral techniques in service of his intuitions, and they're not, and I can believe from reading this that they're not just given to him from clairvoyant perception that I will never ever be able to perceive, because I'm not organized that way, but that it came from his ability to see what was needed.
and his love
Does
for,
that make sense?
say, children and people and the world. And oh my goodness, I can see that.
One Waldorf school in 1919 in Stuttgart, Germany. And everybody's throwing up their hands about China. China is going to this. China's going to ruin the world, and it may very well be. I mean, we're doing a pretty good job over here.
America needs some help there.
A lot of blood on our hands, and other fluids, I think. But where are Waldorf schools proliferating right now? China.
Yeah.
And the guy, Andreas Schmidt, that I interviewed, I was really surprised. He had loads of students from China there. It's like interested in the philosophy of freedom. That was sort of like, how does that come about? But yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, Jeff.
Yeah, we shouldn't say it too loud, though, because China's sort of going like this about Waldorf education right now, as I understand it. So they're going with things that work, and that includes some forays into agriculture that's not the agriculture that starved of the communist bloc during the Stalin's fun party that he had there for the middle of the 1900s. They're actually investing in, but quietly not noticing on purpose the ways in which these are effective, deeply effective ways of being in the world, right?
But it's very promising because yes, the party may get a bit annoyed where it might lead, but it maybe it's an unstoppable force in the sense that the Chinese are coming out of as kind of a peasant herd, which lasted after the Great Leap Forward and everything, and that's a natural evolution, isn't it? That then people want that they're like, oh, now I can kind of save a bit more money and get the best for my child, and then that becomes good that for the country and so on.
It's possible for anyone to encounter anthroposophy, or even without even knowing what that word was, it's possible for it to come in anywhere in the world because it's actually the way the world works.
I love that. Man, I love the way you put that. You're killing me over here. That is so good because that's what anthroposophy means. It's a word means. It's that which is wise within the human being, or something like that. It's inherent, that which is just inherently lawful. And lawful, as we see in this chapter, lawful means to be operationally capable at the level of morality. And here he describes the way in which morality is achieved, and as a scientific first principle, you could say.
Yeah.
Anything else that's cropping? I think we've covered.
I'd love to have another conversation about evolution because we didn't really go there at all today.
I'm not in any hurry to go anywhere. We can carry on.
Yeah, I think that is definitely part of this chapter that we haven't really touched on, and I also wanted to bring in chapter. Is it chapter 9 where he refers to driving force and motive?
Yeah,
as the two sort of parallel tracks of the way in which freedom can be achieved. Like that's a totally neglected that combination, because you could be highly you could have a high motive but a low drive, right? So to speak.
Yeah.
Morally speaking, I don't mean ambitious, silly. Like high motive, but a base drive, right? Like a too overly instinctual, or the opposite, or how do the two interplay in relationship to this process of morality? That's an aside, though. That's that's something I would like to take up at some point as well. That would
Yeah.
that wasn't really taken up in the group, and we haven't taken it up. So I've been thinking about that. But this evolution thing, that was a very fruitful conversation that we had around that. And I loved the way Lorenzo turned, like we were, essentially minerals. Like that is so right.
I
And
love the
and
little smile
Chad
on
was
his
like,
face.
yes, yeah, he had it. He knew it. But Chad
Yeah.
was like, God, I never thought about things in those terms. Like that was just it just blew the room up for that moment. So what do
was
you have to
great.
say? What do you got to say about it? Because you brought it up.
Oh, shoot.
Talking about an evolution.
I don't know. I just kind of wanted to say how impressed I was with Lorenzo. Can someone talk and it will
Yeah.
jig my memory of what I wanted to say.
Well, first of all, he doesn't establish in this chapter that we are the oldest beings, and that in that we're the oldest beings in this process that we're involved in now, and that in a sense we've shedded the species in a certain sense, or an over specialization aspect has come into being that then goes off in its own realm, like the animal kingdom in a certain sense. And so that's the kind of outline, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about, I remember yesterday I was reminded of that because we're the oldest, it kind of it rejoins this perceived split between what came first, consciousness or the physical body. It's because it's the human being that came first, and because we are the oldest, we have the consciousness incarnate, and because we are the most complicated, the most specific, because we are the oldest, because it's such a beautiful you can just, I feel it. I don't really know how to put it to words, but this branching out of everything, like, but all it is just like the hand of a person. Do you know what I mean? Oh, yeah.
I think I'd like to, perhaps this is something along the lines of what you're thinking about. One of the beautiful images that he paints, and is this idea of the human being, the evolution of nature itself, which will redeem nature itself.
Yeah.
There's this guy Tomberg. He talks about how do we redeem the mineral world, and how do we redeem the plant world, and how do we redeem the animal kingdom. And he talks, for example, about how a plant will like carry it requires sun from outside to grow, and it says like how it becomes like its own like center of light. I'm trying to identify if this exists actually in this book, or whether I'm pulling completely from outside the book, but that this theory of evolution, which he's mapped out for us here, and the moral evolution that we're going through, that we are pulling ourselves through, like under our own steam, not without help. I didn't mean it like that, but it has to be an individual free decision to move forward on this evolutionary path. But this is something that nature wants of us, that we this question about what's the meaning of my life, or people tend to ask what's the meaning of life, but I prefer to like, what's the meaning of my life type of thing. Well, it's to assist nature in this process of redeeming, reuniting, removing the disharmonies, the limitations that have been that are part of the incarnation process, resolving the difference between the two realms, so that it's perhaps we basically more or less have like two fundamental states of consciousness: waking and sleeping. I know there are others, but those are, it's like a gross simplification. But those two states of consciousness can be, it's like married one into the other. So the sleeping consciousness can actually inform the waking consciousness if it's managed, and this becomes part of the redemption picture that he presents. But no, I can't remember him actually talking about that in the book. Was that going in any way in the direction you were thinking there, Kate, or were you thinking about something else?
Yeah, it was something that Jonathan was saying yesterday, but now I've obviously forgotten. But it was something about making smudges on the paper and making mistakes and being able to right them is sort of where we are right now as human beings. And I guess it comes in the book where, I don't know what he means in the book when he says this, but he says something like, our ancestors were not yet human beings, which I thought was interesting. And I couldn't tell if he was saying that or if he was saying that through the voice of someone hypothetically. But I thought that was interesting because I was asking that last week, like, what's going on with older consciousness, like human beings with other consciousness, where I could never know what that consciousness was like, but I could imagine that it's different. And were they free? Were they moral? Were they human? It's an interesting question, because yes, it's sort of, I find it's a similar question to what comes first, consciousness or the body? Evolution or consciousness? I don't know. Sort of a circle thing.
I love that. I love that questioning. I love that line of questioning. I also love that you did that with consciousness and the chicken and the egg thing with consciousness. And I was, of course, we're bringing in occult science, or esoteric science, or whatever you want to call it. And then we get the idea that we had our physical bodies were our neurophysical bodies were the first sort of prototype, and that they were they were reflections of beings that were offering something to us, so before it was an internalized consciousness, it was a reflection of the consciousness. Yeah. So and there's something to this. I think this just occurs to me now, because there's this reversal thing that Ben Aharon talks about, right? And you can see it happening in our culture, right? So when you were talking, Angus, about redeeming the mineral, say, let's stay with that for the hot minute. Isn't there a reversal or a mirror image or a shadow image of that in computational technology? I mean, it's rare earth minerals that are being utilized to create a something like we were created on old Saturn. Like it's reflecting our consciousness back to us, and we're the gods, except we're not doing it right. I don't think.
Yeah.
But it's an indication of where we need to go next in a certain way, right? Isn't it?
Yes. I was thinking about that.
It's a signpost.
Yeah.
How and we're go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead. I got excited.
Just that we're also doing it with animals, and we're doing genetic technology, and we're doing it on ourselves. This is the way we're trying to redeem ourselves with these coarse instruments. But it's like a child who cuts their hair, You know, my daughter, my daughter, when she was 3 years old, had bangs up to here, and my wife was like, "No!" And I was like, "Oh man, that's just part of being 3 years old." And it's like that's what we're doing. We're mucking about, except the whole thing's gonna blow up in our face, and we're not gonna survive. But
I was going to say that I had a similar feeling about like mechanical science and how we have got a handle on, and at least as much as like more than the other things, on the laws of dead matter and the laws of the mineral kingdom, and we really like we and we go in the wrong direction when we think that's all there is. But you can go in the other direction and go, wow, you know, the revolution of reductional science is quite an amazing achievement, and it points to the fact that we might be able to make a science out of living things and a science out of feeling sentient things like a animal, you know, in the same way. We'll be able to have a language to explain those phenomena in the way, because before this reductionist science, there was not really an understanding of cause and effect in that realm, and right now we don't have an understanding of cause and effect in the living realms, in the sentient realms.
But we can step more carefully, because, you know, for instance, when the theory of evolution was developing, there was also Goethe was working, and he developed the you know, the understanding of the life of the plant as it is in itself, rather than just sort of from the outside. And yet that was not taken up. So although our science is doing wonderful things, it could go two ways, and it might be better if it only goes one way. There's an argument there. But for instance, the Manichean vision is that we were created for a mission. Do you know what I mean? The gods, they're like, there's a problem in the universe, quick, invent these beings that are going to help us sort it out down there. And but the thing is you know, we could get sucked into the problem, because, for example, say you've got the mineral kingdom, and it's conscious, but it's deep slumbering, deep sleep consciousness, and it's maybe got like a frisson of kind of life still hovering within it. And we could kind of like work with that in a fashion, with like living thinking, to kind of bring it a bit more awake and bring more life to it. Or we could kind of like grab it and push it even further down. Do you know what I mean? In both ways, we're fashioning something from it.
Well, I believe that the revolutions of Galileo and Newton are the waking up of the human being to will forces, like the understanding of maths and how things are in motion comes from the fact that we are in a body and we learn how to walk. Do you know what I mean? So that's so we only are creating these sciences out of becoming aware of what it is to be a human being. And so
do we go enough
you
with
you can revert that, and you can make it outside yourself, and you can believe that it's got nothing to do with you. And a lot of people would have no idea about this idea that actually learning to walk as a human being is understanding maths, you know, and it's this, and it's a sleeping consciousness of minerals. It's a sleeping consciousness of will. But I don't know. I'm just hopeful, and I mean, because I used to be really anti-reductionist, anti-Newton, that's why I'm so strongly trying to find the positive in it, because I used to be so reactionary to it.
Yeah, but you know, within that positive, we still need to understand exactly its limitations, because if maths is born out of human movement, and, you know, understanding of forward and backwards geometry, up, down, left, and right, through that experience of activity, the human being is alive in an open and free and ever creative world. But we take mass and we imagine we can isolate that off from everything. Do you know what I mean? And repeat the same thing again. Do you know what I mean? I figured out how that chandelier swung, and now I can repeat that everywhere and make it and make the whole universe repeat itself, which it has never done before. Because no blade of grass is the same as another blade of grass. Nature does not repeat herself. She works out of archetypes, but she doesn't sort of hammer it and say, right, the next thing is going to be exactly like the previous thing. And that's what we tend to be doing with maths and measure at present.
Yes,
And
Jonathan, but
could be
we can
doing
make it so. We can make it so. We can canalize rivers. We can control. Everything can be predictable, and everything can be constructed to be forever organized in a efficient, very efficient manner.
Mm.
Come on, get on board. Get your chip.
But back to the smudge on the paper, even if we do take it the wrong direction, you know, I feel like an infinite kind of faith that yes, then we've created another new problem in the universe, but you know, then we will respond as part of the universe and work for more solutions toward that, which might mean creating a whole new series of human beings.
Isn't it also equally important that we notice that we got something wrong, like when you hit a wrong note? Right? Isn't it like the developed ability to intuit when something's off, right?
Yes.
So if we're developing, say we're developing into the 12 senses, say, and I can tell, and I can do this now, and I'm pretty sure that you guys could too. You know when somebody's off, when they're not well, or a tree, or that sort of thing. You know, it was said of Herr Dr. Steiner that he could look at a seed and tell you whether it would germinate or not, because he could see its well-being, its vitality, and that seems fantastic from a sort of anecdotal sense, but from this point of view, it's the ground. It's because the ground of being speaks to, through, and in us, right?
So it's just a further development of what you just said, that you can look at someone and say, "Oh, are you feeling okay?"
Yeah, and taste. So you can taste when I drink raw milk. Oh my God! I mean, it feels so wholesome, right? And that's the taste. The taste of wholesomeness is a functional reality. It's a functioning and functional reality that we are. It goes to Kate's idea that Kate's illustration of the way in which it's already here for us, and it's in the 12 senses, it's in the 7 life processes. We are incarnating into it.
I'm going to talk about one of my favorite I think it's a Brother Grimm, or it might be Hans Christian Andersen stories in that sense, and to do with moral evolution. You know, the Princess and the Pea story. And you were talking about making mistakes. So Steiner's like explanation, rendering of that poem is your soul. How do you test whether a princess is a real princess? How do you test whether a soul is really sufficiently developed? Yeah, if you stack up the mattresses and put a little pea under there, and that soul still feels deep. Still feels the discomfort of it's like a minor perturbance, then we've got a soul capable of receiving, or like meeting her prince, or it's like reuniting with the spiritual world in a more conscious. Sorry, say again, Kate.
Just a fine detail, being able to discern to that detailed level, and to the point where it's like
my feeling life tells
there's no way that P is felt, but the intention of the P is felt. Yeah.
or it's like just being ultra honest with yourself, and with your voice of conscience might be telling you, a little niggling voice there, and other people might like say, I don't care, there's lots of money at the end of it, I'll do it. Whereas to take a simple example, but whereas once as you develop yourself, you begin to take your inner voice ever more seriously, because you know that's you talking to yourself. There's a infinitely more understanding aspect of your being that's trying to communicate to you that if you go down this road, if you do this thing, actually you're not going to be being true to yourself.
Right. So it's your perception.
Yeah.
And this actually brings us back to I remember we had this tricky conversation about conscience a couple of sessions ago, didn't we? Where it was like we felt as if we were floundering a little bit, but it really does connect in very, at least in my mind, very concretely with this idea of where does moral evolution, how does it move forward for us as individuals? It is the voice of conscience there becomes like a key aspect.
I have a question. So, this is imperative, this moral operation, say this moral process that involves these elements. And it seems wildly crucial right now for humanity. Not only because it is where we are in our evolution, clearly to me, it's also it has to be done or we're in trouble. I mean, I really believe that this has got to be, it's got to be taken hold of. in the philosophy of freedom, do we have clues to where this leads, what the mechanisms are, what the operational procedures are, the existential realities that give us a shift from individual consciousness into collective consciousness, where what we touch in the perceptual world becomes perceivable for everybody at once to some extent. Like all of nature works this way. All of nature works this way.
What do you mean? What is collective consciousness?
It's something like, I mean, you could describe it whatever way you want. It's a collective intelligence. It's a collective perception of reality that is at once intuited by every person, because we're part of the universal process, right? So these, I know these things intellectually, but can we find them? Can we ground in them somewhere? Angus says yes. So yes, Angus, I want to give for it.
Yeah, because I had a picture but prior to you asking this question, and then it's like we're in sync without sort of like knowing about it. The question I was asking myself is, 30 years ago, if I'd listened to a conversation like this, basically before I met Stein, I'd have said, these people are blowing smoke up their own asses. It's like, they're theorizing, blah, 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 blah. What's it got to do with reality? And this is really where the philosophy of freedom is fundamentally different from the rest of anthroposophy, because you are learning about your own essential nature, and you're learning what this universal activity of thinking, that being which created you, that being which tells you about it's like it unites you with the world around you as we live deeper into that real experience that anybody can have if they move into this experience. Then exactly what you're describing there, where we have this common framework, where we recognize each other as being united in in some type of action or some type of motive, then that becomes very real. It moves beyond theory, it moves beyond belief, and it becomes direct experiential knowledge. And this is, for me, why Steiner so it says that it is the philosophy of freedom that will still be around, rewritten, of course, in 1,000 years' time. Anthroposophy, not. But, and why? Because thinking is going to be with us till the end of time. As long as we are human beings, we are going to be thinking human beings. So the developments that it's like we are producing within ourselves by knowing ourselves better, and our relationship to this universal activity of thinking is a deepening of self-consciousness. It's a deepening, but at the same time, it's a deepening of a connection with the rest of the world. Yeah, so that's how I think that's what you were looking for in your question. That's how I understood your question. How do we, in this book, find something that takes us beyond mere theory and actually really genuinely reconnects us with the world? It's thinking. It's like through this exceptional state, it's like deepening the experience of what it means to be, and to be a thinking being, to have clarity of thoughts, increasing clarity of thought around our moral life and how we know the world. That is something that completes us as human beings.
Yeah, and I believe that thought will become clearer, more filled with light, and also warmth and life.
I think there's also a clue as you were talking. That's very beautiful too, Jonathan. I think there's something in the speciation process. That this goes back to this conversation we had a little bit about species being able to talk to each other in a certain sense, like sort of. It's a bit of a leap for this conversation, but something about becoming fully human, like the rest of nature, like the trees in a forest. Say this is the example I was going to use for collective intelligence. Say there's some sort of invasion in the forest. Could be an external, could be disease, could be a bug or something like that. All different kinds of trees act in unison, simultaneity, to drop their leaves and conserve energy, because they've all perceived it as unique organisms within an ecosystem. They've all recognized something at once, or something was communicated through their unification, something like that. So this is what I'm trying to get at, like human beings communicating as a unified entity, because the way out of this moment is going to have to be, in my opinion, a polar shift. I don't see another way. Like there has to be like something that is collectively perceived as reality at some sort of pop new level, right? It's like, oh yes, well, we thinking about the consequence of everything that we do might be a really good idea, and we might be wrong about the smudge on the paper, but let's just start trying to do that now. I just don't. I'm really concerned that needs to happen, and so I really would like to find the agency out of which consciousness itself evolves. What is that agency that evolves consciousness? That's the question we never could answer in the riddles of philosophy, but it was always somewhat there, right? And I know we can go into esoterica and talk about Christ consciousness but this book is asking us to actually build the actual organic system that is on top of let's say, the organic system that doesn't have its own laws, but belongs to the laws of the natural world, that is somewhat sort of slow or unchanging. But we have the novel ability on top of that to build something, and it has something to do with that, I think.
I don't know if it can happen at a pop, but I
I
do
agree.
think you're right.
I was thinking the same as Kate, but I also think it's problematic from a freedom perspective. If we're talking about an event that's going to change people's mind.
Yeah, I don't mean an external event. I mean, there will be external events that are going to change
There will
people's
be.
minds. There's no question about that. I would rather avoid those events and have a psychic event where people's, you know what I mean? Psychic's not the right word because it sounds cheap, but I mean where freedom is actually achieved at a level whereby that the universality of perception is available. It's the Christ miracles, right?
Yes.
So the Christ miracles weren't. It wasn't about the actual alteration of the perceptual world. It was the alteration of the consciousness of the people so that they could all perceive the same reality at a completely different level. And so if the Christ consciousness is a abdication of freedom, then sign me up.
But remember, the miracles stopped after a while. And, you know, he could have sent angels down from heaven to save him from the cross or whatever, but no miracle occurring there.
No, the
So
miracle
that
didn't.
was kind of like an ebbing away of the old. I think that this, you know, we do have a problem here in that sense, that unless I mistake you, Jeff, but if it's going to happen by a pop, it seems to suggest that some people are going to be brought up whether they're ready or not, because otherwise for people to become ready, it seems a very kind of unorganized, organic, and we've got to be very patient about it.
Yeah, I think we're overemphasizing the pop.
The pop,
as if
fair enough.
Like I, you know, this idea that you know, I just want to, you know, things are going to give me a damn heart attack. You know, I just want the crack. Give me the, you know. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something more subtle, like the Christ miracles, and then there's a certain amount of readiness that's necessary, but there's also the certain amount of grace associated with the actual being of Christ within the etheric of the earth, right? So there's a perceivable, like sometimes maybe readiness is just not having cynicism, or readiness is not having preconceived notions, or readiness is like, yes, maybe that, you know, that it's just having a simple orientation with reality that is easily tappable, that the inherent wisdom is easily. Yeah.
I think those popping sounds will be people going insane and people's bodies no longer functioning. Eye health, mental health, or bodily health. I was listening to it's like a series of lectures where Stein is talking about like the Ahrimanic effects on health, and says that these are physical illnesses that are like created within the organisms. Like anything that's like has that type of origin is Ahrimanic in essence. And what does that mean? It means that it's like they've inherited too much, it's like rationalism, intellect in their thinking, and that's beginning to pervade their souls. Like it divorces them from any concept of the spiritual world. And then the Luciferic is the other side. It's the delusional, egotistical impulsiveness that we're also seeing in the world. And as people become iller and iller in these two spheres, they're actually, in their suffering, they're going to be popping off individually. And I think of it, I wonder if it's going to be a little bit like a stereotypical of which there are not many, but a stereotypical cancer patient who's like tries all the remedies that modern science provides and doesn't find a solution. And so like says, I'm so desperate, I'll believe in anything. I'll take anything, even a crackpot like Steiner. I'll take his ideas on board. So I think the popping events, one way for me of understanding how they might actually express themselves, they'll be at an individual level. There'll be crises of health, either in the bodily nature or in the mental. And there's certainly plenty of evidence of that. I shouldn't be smiling when I say this is tragic, but this is, it seems to me that what I'm describing there is becoming ever more a part of our reality. 4% of American kids are autistic, the latest statistic I happen to read.
There's two ways one could meet that. Like, oh my God, the world is horrible and life's so unfair. My child's autistic, or which is one way, that one goes, and then the other is, this release of cynicism and just okay, let's see the next moment of what's going to come. What we can do.
We just Jeff, you need to go shortly. I was wondering, I'd just like to leave with a little bit of a couple of quotes that I found from this guy Silesius, just to round this out. The reason I went for him, because I was investigating him, having listened to this series of lectures where they talk. There is talk about, oh no, I might be mixing that up with 178. Anyway, fascinating book about the description of mystics, the mystical mind. And I found out that Angela Silesius, the rose is without a why. She blooms because she blooms. She pays no attention to herself. She doesn't ask if anyone sees her. And we've mentioned the rose like multiple times in the philosophy of freedom. So I felt immediately drawn to that, and I thought I'd start find a couple of other interesting quotes that are specifically related to this German mystic who lived in the, I believe it was the 18th century. I can't remember the dates off the top of my head now, but Steiner talks about how beautifully poetic he is in trying to communicate spiritual ideas. And the one in the top left is the importance of the will. We've been the will is that by which as free beings we have to employ our will to change the world. And Silesius is like, by the will art thou lost, by the will art thou found, by the will art thou free, captive, and bound. It's like captures the duality of that, of the nature. Again, it's like, how are we going to use our wills? Are we going to use it to evolve morally, or are we going to remain completely unaware of the potential to use our will to, and thereby just devolve morally into the subterranean kingdoms that Steiner talks about in other texts. And the last one, linking it a little bit to your question, Jeff, where can we find this unification? There's multiple parts in Silesius where he's got some beautiful phrases, sentences about the meeting of the individual with Christ, the meeting of the individual with God, and understanding, experiencing directly how one is the other. And I find that this reflected in this final one here. Paradise is at your own center. Unless you find it there, there is no way to enter.
Yeah. The threefold social organism is in your threefold self.
With those wise words, Kate, should we just